And I'm going to show you a video of Roger Federer's topspin in super slow motion, so you can really see these different phases that we're talking about coming from the slot, the dropping of the head of the racket, the pronation. You'll see that his forearm is still pointed to the sky, almost into contact before he starts to pronate, and you'll see his arm roll over in pronation as he passes through contact. But particularly, I want you to see how sharply vertical the modern topspin shot is. We just still have it in our movement map minds that this is somehow just a gradual low to high sort of casual path. Even I can swing it horizontally and then kind of roll over and get some topspin at it. That's not really the modern topspin executed at any high level. There is a inside out path, racket head dropping, and then as we approach contact, there's a very sharp rise, a throwing of the racket head in this windshield wiper action. This action is 25 to 30% vertical right in this contact zone, right here. And it's a lot more vertical than anyone really imagines just watching the game in real speed. So let's focus on that for now. Here we'll watch Federer in super slow motion coming from the slot, and we'll see the master move, the supination of the forearm, and the dropping and extending of the racket head down from the hand and elbow. And I'll pause the video as he completes the master move. Federer transitions to the turn of the swing, where the body is pivoting towards the target, and here is where he moves into aggressive internal rotation of his shoulder in the throwing and extending the racket head out on the swing circle. Sometimes the forearm starts in pronation here, but in Federer's case, as you will see, he keeps his forearm in a supinated position with the racket lagging back into the last moments into contact. Only here does Federer start his forearm pronation into contact, just 6 to 8 inches before contact. Now as Federer moves into and through contact, watch how the pronating forearm and turn and the pulling up and back on the racket handle and the windshield wiper movement causes the sharply vertical rise on the racket head through contact, one of the key movements in the modern topspin forehand. A couple of different things about the common swing errors that we see at the recreational at the highest level, and just to demonstrate it, they're at the highest level as well. I'm going to show you a clip of Serena Williams that I filmed, and it's filmed from the rear down the line target here, and that's how I'll demonstrate this. So I want to walk through what you're going to see, because even in slow motion you can't always see these things the way they should be seen. So Serena has the external high take back and external shoulder, and she has a nice slot drop. So she's, doing everything that we've talked about for what goats do. But now from this point on, she's going to become very un-goat-like. And this happens much more frequently than we think. And the goats are human beings, just like ourselves. And when they get nervous, they lose confidence. Then they lose the automaticity of their swing, and they start to overthink it and overmanage it. And this often happened with Serena later in her career. And it happened in this particular instance, and it happened many times in this match. I could show you many more. So she gets to the slot, and then, just as I was saying, the recreational player gets over aggressive with the hitting side and drives this out too quickly and too soon. She does exactly the same thing. Now you can see the racket tip lined up with her hand, the racket cast out on the swing circle too soon before she's completed the rotation of her body. So now this racket is starting to swing on its own with the arm, And then because she's nervous, she's not moving her body as well as she would normally. The body starts to freeze up, and the rotation stops of the body too soon. And now the arm, to complete the swing, has to take over. And with this casting action, instead of the path being inside out, which is what we want, the racket is cast out on the circle here too soon. The arm is driving it, and now the racket head is approaching more on an outside-in swing path, the swinging gate action that I talked about. And instead, at contact, instead of the racket head being still down and behind the hand, which is what we see in Roger's topspin and all good topspins, the racket head has swung around, the tip of the racket has swung around ahead of the hand, and she meets the ball something like this. And it's a very horizontal path because she is also pronated too soon and brought the racket head up instead of keeping it down and laid back. So the swing becomes very flat. She swings across it and drives the ball into the bottom of the left net, and you can see her reaction after the video. It's just like, oh, that's terrible. Well, it was terrible for that swing. But the amazing thing about Serena is that she could mentally regroup, and usually she got angry at herself, and then she would make herself, just let herself swing more. And once she did that, you know, the kind of goat action that we're talking about came much more into play in her game, but she still struggled. And so there's really not a huge distinction in the human being between the goat and the average person. They don't start with superhuman powers. They're not Marvel superheroes. They make themselves into Marvel superheroes through deliberate practice. Here we see Serena moving into an attempt at a topspin forehand return. And I've turned on the tracing tool to trace her hand path to show how her first movement out of the slot is an aggressive pivot of the racket handle to the target and an aggressive internal rotation of her shoulder, while casting the racket head out on the swing circle too soon, which transforms her swing into a wild arm-driven swing, with the racket head moving in a flat outside-in path, with the tip of the racket getting ahead of her hand at contact. The result is a badly mishit shot, pulling it down and into the net. And you can see her reaction. I'll play it through in 3 loops. And this brings me to another book on my deliberate practice reading list. This is a book by Steven Kotler called The Rise of Superman, Decoding the Science of Ultimate Human Performance. So in this book, Kotler follows the journey of several super athletes and how they acquired their seemingly Superman-like skills. And really it's, again, showing you the path of deliberate practice that they all follow to develop these goat-like or superhuman skills. So I hope you'll read it. I hope you'll get inspired, and I'll hope you continue to engage on the journey in this ascent of skill excellence that we're on. So instead of this recreational, long, outside in swing path and contact, we want something entirely different. And this is where I'm going to switch over to my Bruce Lee character and demonstrate what Bruce Lee was all about with his short power. And in doing so, I also want to reinforce these concepts of the movement map that we've been talking about. Now, in terms of boxing or the martial arts and tennis, the swing path, again, is not a roundhouse punch where my hand now is extended out on the punching circle, the throwing circle early, and then coming in with a long, slow, uniform movement of my rotation of my body. Opponent could see that punch coming, and it wouldn't do much damage if it got there. It probably wouldn't get there. So what do we want instead? Well, in the very large circle terms, what kind of punch do we want on a topspin forehand? Well, basically we want a uppercut. So we want the hands not to be extended from the body, but we want to be pulled in, and we want to be in a crouch. We want to sink into the ground so that we have power to push out of the ground. And so we're going to do some sort of wind up. Maybe we don't want to give away our opponent and do some big old wind up, but there'll be a coil up here and a tilt of the shoulders, just like we have in the topspin shot. And the arm and elbow are in a powered position. I can feel the coil in my body and feel it into my back. And I can feel the pressing into the ground as I sink here, ready to start the turn of the swing and the forward part of the swing. So again, it would be a mistake to stand up straight and extend the arm early in this forward movement, and again, slowly lose all the momentum of the swing. Instead, as we power from our feet and ground and we turn our hips and we get to about here, the turn of the swing, turn of the punch, we're just driving up energy and gathering momentum. We're not firing and exploding at that point. It's only when we get to the turn of the punch and the swing, and we're relatively speaking, very close to the target, and our punch, it could be an inch away like Bruce Lee demonstrated. And so he would have everything coiled here, and then he would deliver all that power in 1 inch. But typically it's further away than that. It's 6 to 8 inches, much like the tennis racket is 6 to 8 inches away from contact before we are in a super aggressive internal rotation of the shoulder and a pronation of the forearm and twist. And so we're building momentum at the turn of the swing, and we've driven off, our hips have stopped turning by here, our upper torso rotation has turned and is stopping. And as that stops, the energy is now passing into my shoulder complex, down to my arm, and all the way out to my fist. And then we have the same sort of elbow whip release. We have the elbow tucked slightly ahead of this turning hip here, just like we do in topspin forehand. And now we're rising with our body, stopping with our lead leg, just like we stop with our non-hitting hand in tennis. And then we're stopping here so that the hitting side can now truly be aggressive and really fire through. So again, it starts like this, and then it might go, it all comes in the last 60% of this forward swing. That's where all the speed and power comes from. But at the same time, the difference between just an uppercut punch and a topspin forehand is, and I'll demonstrate that now. So on the topspin forehand, we've had some winding and coiling back here, and try to take it back with 2 hands, but our hands have to break because we reached the anatomical limit of where our hands can reach our lead side, and then our hands have to break, and then there's going to be some sort of lowering and winding further of the shoulder, so we have external rotation back here, and then we have more external rotation into the slot. Only now in the slot are we fully coiled and loaded up for our swing. And again, the racket tip is pointed to the side back fence, not to this side or not to this side, but because our hand and forearm are coiled back and wound up, it's pointing back to the side back fence. And our non-hitting arm is extended out, stretching our back so that we can use this as a pulling mechanism in our rotation. We'll get into more details of this later. We're just trying to do large circles here. And we drive forward with the turn of our lower body first initiating things. That's transferred to our turning torso. And we're starting forward with the arm, but the racket is lagging back and down of our hand because we've supinated so that our forearm is pointing to the sky. Racket head is lowering. And then as we get to the turn of the swing, that's when we begin a much more aggressive movement action. Now from the turn of the swing, the shoulder is going to go into internal rotation. This movement, and the forearm continues to be laid back in a more supinated position. You saw that with Roger, all the way into contact almost. This pit of his elbow is still facing up. It's only when, as we approach contact, does the forearm start to pronate and the racket rolls over like that. But again, we're building momentum. We're summing up the forces of the kinetic chain as they moved up our body all the way out into this still coiled lag position at the turn of the swing. And then we're going to have, as opposed to the uppercut punch, even a more vertical rise of this through contact. The mass of the racket and the speed of the racket head are sufficient that it's not going to arrest the momentum of our swing. The racket head does slow down at contact, maybe up to 20%, but we really don't feel it that much except for the sinking into the ball into the strings as the momentum of the racket passes through. So we don't want to freeze at this point. We still want to be swinging freely through and focusing on directing the ball to the target, not so much swinging and hitting at the ball. Of course, the other major difference between the uppercut punch, as Bruce Lee might do it, and our tennis topspin swing is that on the punch, we're making contact with our hand. In tennis, we have this 27-inch extension of our hand, this whip object, and it makes a huge difference because, as we've been saying, if we lag and coil and preserve the energy of this lag and coil into the turn of the swing, then we can accelerate this racket head 4 times the speed of our hand. And that's just a tremendous amount of power and speed that we can get from the whip effect. But again, we don't want to lose track of our large circle learning, which is, all the things that are bringing us, the summation of kinetic chain energy of our body, the pulling action of our body in the rotation, leading the lagging racket head down, and then the release of this in a free release of that energy without any thought of trying to maneuver and manage contact. We want to totally eliminate that. A famous golf instructor, Mike Austin, said the only way to gain control is to give up control. So we really have to give up our idea, again, untutored ideas. Somehow we can manage this action, but it's way too fast. It's way too fast. This is from the slot to the contact is less than 0.1 seconds. You only have a few milliseconds, relatively speaking, to pass through here. There's no way you can consciously control this and manage it. And so that notion has to be given up completely. And you have to build confidence in letting this go, of course, with the right form. And the racket will come around on its own because of the forces of physics that we talked about in earlier lessons. The center of mass, when thrown out on the swing circle, wants to pivot this racket head around on its own. If we let the action happen in a pulling way around the swing circle, the squaring of the ball to the racket as we want it, the timing issues will mostly be eliminated. Not, of course, always, but largely, yes. And so this means that you can eventually swing through as hard as your body can do it if you have the proper form. And it's not going to erode your consistency that much. And you will feel in this action the ball sinking into the strings deeper. And that resonance of that feel will come back into the core of your body, because that's where the power is being generated from. That's what the goats feel. And that's what we want to feel. So we're on to the deliberate practice phases of this lesson. And I want to start by explaining this strange setup here and explain what these things are. This yellow bag that you see here is called an impact bag, and it happens to be the #1 training tool in golf swing instruction. So why is it the #1 training tool? Well, it helps us do a lot of things. For one thing, it takes away all the anxiety about really hitting a ball and seeing it go out of bounds and all the bad things that can happen to a golf ball. So we're taking away a lot of the anxiety of the result by hitting this bag with our club, and it's foolproof. You can't miss it. So then we can focus without anxiety on just the nature of our swing, and we can practice different phases of the swing, and particularly the last phase, the release into contact. We have a sound and feel reinforcement to whether we're doing it correctly or not. So in golf, especially with an iron, similar to our topspin forehand, we want to check, first of all, to see that our hands are leading the club head into contact. Without that, a number of bad things happen and we can't really execute a high-level swing. We don't want the toe of the club swinging in an outside-in swing path, and when we practice, we can see where the club is landing. It's landing like this, outside in, ahead of our hands. We know we have to start correcting that, and we can do it instantly. We just have to rethink it a bit and make sure that our hands are ahead of the club head. And we can practice different phases of the swing. We can start from the beginning, and in golf, for an iron anyway, the ball is usually, impact is usually set up sort of slightly in front of the middle, between the two middle legs. And so we have the impact bag set up in the right orientation, and we can practice our feet orientation. Again, we can do that in tennis as well. You know, a lot of golfers believe that you should have a slightly flared setup in your feet so that you can turn back and turn forward into the swing. You can experiment around with that. But the most valuable is the nature of impact. And if we have an inside-out path, the bag is going to shift slightly out when we make impact to the outside. If we have a swinging gate action that I've been preaching against, the bag tends to sort of move in the forward or left direction. And we can check those things as well in our golf swing. And finally, you know, there's a simple power element to this, is that it's fun to hit this soft bag, and you can swing pretty hard in golf with an iron on it, and you're not going to do any damage. And that kind of frees you up to really take a decent fast swing at something. And then you can still measure all the other parameters of your golf swing while you're doing it. So it's, again, the #1 tool. So what do we have that's equivalent in tennis to an impact bag? Well, I guess we have the Topspin Pro and the eye trainer and a few other things that cost a couple $100 to $300. And they do something of the things that we were talking about, but it doesn't necessarily stop you at impact and allow you to measure and feel all the things that you're feeling with this golf impact bag. So I'm showing you a way to create a tennis impact bag, and all you need is standard chair, standard pillow, and a couple 18-inch bungee cords that you can get overnight for Amazon for less than $1 or $2. And so to create this impact bag for tennis, we're just going to wrap the bungee cord around with the top of the pillow sticking up 2 or 3 inches over the chair. You can do it with one, but better to secure it with 2 bungee cords. So we have a nice, impact bag that's at the impact level that we want for our topspin swing. And we have the pillow slightly over the top of the back of the chair because we don't always want to just slam into the pillow impact bag down here and stop the racket. We'll go through a few exercises like that, but ultimately the vertical path of the racket will make contact and then continue on this arc. And so we don't want to lose track of that swing path and that feel as well. So the first exercise I want you to do in this Bruce Lee swing lesson is execute an uppercut punch against the bag. And so we're going to set up with the kind of orientation that we might set up with the topspin forehand. So impact is usually going to be slightly ahead of our lead leg. Our body is going to be closed to the target. Target's over here. I'm closed, I'm coiled. I'm going to drop into the ground, gather my power, coil my shoulder, get some energy into the hitting shoulder and arm, and I'm going to drive up from the ground, but we're following our proper sequencing. We're not going to, extend our arm out and swing around like this. This is something your opponent would see a mile away coming and probably never hit anyone. If you did hit someone, it would be a very slow roundhouse swing. We don't want that in boxing. We don't want that in tennis. So we want a short, accelerating uppercut driven by our body mostly, letting the power flow into the turn of the punch and then delivering it like this. So I'm going to be very clear. I don't want anyone to swing and punch hard. I don't want anyone to hurt their elbow or hurt their hand in pounding this. Don't do that. We're talking about a slow uppercut punch, thinking and feeling the movements of the uppercut punch. So I'm going to pause the video in a second and I want you to do 10 sort of slow motion punches. Maybe the last few you could add a little bit of power, just a little bit, just so you can feel the energy going through and flowing out to the hand. I'll pause.